All right. Well, welcome everyone. It's 3 o'clock and we are here for our regularly scheduled Citywide Advisory Committee meeting. We've had a lot of really great discussions thus far, and I am anxiously awaiting today's discussion, which is going to be pretty exciting. I did want to go ahead and introduce all of our staff members and anybody that might be presenting today, so everybody knows who they are. We do have our current Planning and Development Services Director with us today, Mark Lavin, and this is actually his last week with us, so we'd like to thank him for being such a good supporter of the zoning code rewrite and giving us all the resources that we need to do a good job. So thank you, Mark. We're going to miss you. And go ahead.
I was just going to say thanks, Andrea, and thanks to the committee too for all the good work you're doing. And I look forward to watching it and watching matters progress. So thank you.
Hey, Mark, what's next for you?
It's in the works. I don't have anything to tell you just yet, Dan, but I'm working on it. I'd like it to be housing, which I know would delight you, but I can't say that for sure yet.
So we have Mark with us, and with that being said, as Mark departs, we have our new interim Planning and Development Services Director with us today. So I'd like to introduce Kelsey Stewart.
Hi,
and
nice to see all of you.
We also have Maria Wig from our Community Engagement Division. She's our director there and is going to help us with community engagement. We have Wendy Ellistad. She's from the mayor's office, and she helps us with all of that coordination and is such a big help. We have Cody Riddle, our existing Deputy Director of Planning, with us as well. And then we also have a community engagement and mayor's office individual, Tess Goodwin, who is assisting us with some of our audio, visual, and just helping us overall coordinate. So a special thank you to her. We also have our consulting partners, which is Don Elliott with Clarion Associates. His associate, Gabby Hart, also with Clarion Associates. And then we also have Diane Krishlon, who is with Krishlon and Associates, and she's our local representative of our consulting staff. Overall, we have all of our committee members here with the exception of one. So Christopher Vander Stooy is actually out of the office, but since we do have the ability to stream via live YouTube, he's going to be able to go back and review everything utilizing our YouTube channel. And that's a great reminder that if anybody would like to revisit or review what we're accomplishing, what we're discussing, you can always do that. That is always available. And then any of the materials that you'd like, if you'd like to revisit those are available on both of our website, cityofboise.org/zoning-code-rewrite. And that's also available for our public to access any of the materials that we'll be reviewing as well. And then we also have our group shared Google Drive. So you can always access the presentation, any of our early materials, minutes, any of those types of things are always at your fingertips. So you can always use those. So as we begin today, we are going to start to talk about some of the zoning districts that we have proposed. And we'll walk you through that. So we'll have short presentations, and then we're going to present to you questions and really focus on some good quality discussion. And we'll go ahead and stop and set you up for that discussion to happen. If you have questions, go ahead and let us know. We will have a short intermediate break that's 5 minutes in the middle. So if you do need to use the restroom, if you need to get a drink or just stand up and stretch, that'll be the opportunity for you to do there. And then we also are going to allot some time at the end in case we do have any attendees that would like to provide comment to us as we move forward. As always, I just kind of wanted to review the project goals of what we are trying to accomplish is really implementing our comprehensive plan, building on those strategic priorities that Mayor McLean has established for us, making sure that we're involving and engaging our citizens and stakeholders as we move forward, making sure that we are finding that best blend that's going to work from us. So that might be a mixture of traditional form-based and performance-based zoning. We'll take a look at that. Incentivizing and making great design and diverse mixed-use land uses throughout our city. Making sure that we have a development process that ensures predictability of all of our decisions. So no matter what side you're on, whether you're a developer or a neighbor, you know what you can expect from the zoning code and from all of us within planning and development services, and making sure that it's user-friendly, that everybody can use it. So when we talk about these things, we're all going to tie it back to the city's vision of creating that city for everyone and really keeping in the back of our mind how we can create a safe and healthy place for everyone, a home for everyone, movement and mobility for everyone, a clean city for everyone, opportunity for everyone, and engagement for everyone. So I really want everybody to think big and globally in that context. And so when we are thinking about that, not necessarily thinking about I or me or specific to my neighborhood, even though those are valuable experiences that you're going to bring to the table, but thinking collectively as we, the city, and we as a community, and how we can create all of these places for everyone. So we do have our normal rules of engagement. We all do really great with that. We're going to treat everybody with kindness, be open-minded and think about us as a community, being ready to share our thoughts respectfully, and we'll do that without interruption. And the best way to do that is if you would like to speak, go ahead and raise your hand and we'll make sure that you have that opportunity. And then really just being ready to learn and doing our personal best. So really with that, I think that gives us a really good opening. I can go ahead and stop sharing, introduce Don Elliott with Clarion Associates, and let him begin the initial presentation before we get to question number 1.
Don, I think you're muted.
Don, you're still muted.
I understand. I'm having a hard time getting Zoom to show. I was watching all of you before, and now I'm having a hard time even getting Zoom to open for me. So let me try it. Let me try one more time, but I'm with apologies to all of you, I may need to get out and get back in. I do not know why this is not letting me in. I'm going to briefly leave the meeting and come back in and hope that Zoom will now allow me to see you again and present things. So.
Oh, while we wait for Don to rejoin us, I hope everybody's enjoying the lovely spring weather.
I'm back. And it looks
Perfect.
better. Well,
Welcome back.
Thank you. Sorry, I have no idea what happened. That, every day Zoom has a new surprise for me, and that was a new one. So let me try to get this presentation up, and I will ask you, Andrea, to say, to tell me when I have the proper screen up. Please let me take a look at it. Can you see the slideshow?
Everything looks good.
All right. Are you seeing the proper screen, the full screen version of this?
Yes.
All right, great. So with apologies for what just happened, let's get started and use our time as wisely as possible. So as Andrea said, we're going to review very briefly where we are in this process and then talk about three fundamental things that have come up as we have gotten into the meat of drafting module 1. These three questions we're going to pose today were on the agenda. One has to do with the structure, the zone district consolidation. One has to do with continuing discussion of this form. How do you control the form and make sure it fits? And then with a lot of local examples that Andrew's going to weigh in on what compatibility means in Boise. So here's the timeline. And we are, again, in the beginning, we've gotten through the kind of diagnostic report. We are now in module 1. We are in the process of drafting it. And as we said, this March meeting was added to the calendar to give us exactly this. We talked about district, then we talked about uses. Now we're coming back with additional questions related to how we draft those sections. So this is briefly where we are. I got ahead of myself here. This March meeting is about remaining issues. We are putting this together. It is taking shape. And next month in April at the meeting, we will walk you through the actual public draft. It will be drafted. It will be available for public comment, and we will walk you through how we made some of the tricky decisions to deal with difficult challenges. So districts and uses, module 1, which you're drafting. This is just a reminder. We're not making this stuff up. It comes from Blueprint Boise. It talks about mixed use zoning districts for regional community neighborhood activity centers, varied intensity and mix of uses. Series of mixed use zoning districts to promote more transit supportive patterns of development. Consider form-based. That's why form-based is back in the conversation today. Encourage a mix of housing types and densities in residential neighborhoods, particularly for projects greater than 2 acres. So once again, I just reminding you, this is stuff that has been on the books for many years as guidance in Boise that we're trying to figure out what's the right way to put it into a series of rules and incentives. So, and you can see policy recommendations in the green box to the right. Now, let's get into it. We're going to set up the first question, which has to do with zone districts. This is a menu of zone districts. The first time you've seen this. On the left side of this column table is the existing zone districts that you use currently in Boise. On the right-hand side is our proposal at this stage in the drafting process for how we listen to what you said earlier and try to thread the needle, try to reflect what Blueprint Boise said, reflect what the diagnostic said, reflect what you said in these meetings, and say, so how simple and intuitive could we make this zone district structure? I'm going to not walk you through each one of these. I'm going to walk you through the key ones that I think you may want to focus on and highlight the difficulty of this. Let me start by saying, before I walk through the details, everybody just take a deep breath. Cities do this. They cross this bridge. They, once a generation or once every 20 years or 10 years, but usually it's less frequently than 10 years, kind of take a deep breath and say, okay, we do have guidance. We think we know where we want to go. How are we going to revise our rules and incentives to get us there? And yes, it's going to mean the old structure that we're used to is not going to be there anymore. It's going to be different. And the question that comes up along the way usually is it right? Will it get us there? And secondly, can we be fair to the people who are in the process? Every property owner, every tenant in Boise who is going to live through this process of the change of rules. All I can say is, cities gather the courage and the vision to do this regularly and to say, we can do this. We can cross this bridge. That's not to say this list is correct. It's to say that if it seems like a lot of change, it is. And Blueprint Boise calls for a lot of change. The real question is, have we got this right, or we need to do further refinements of it? I'd like to point out first, I'm going to walk you through about 5 or 6 of these that are worth significant attention. A1, you have A1 and A2 districts. You'll see the two at the top, one at the bottom. A1 districts are used for two different purposes right now. You actually use it as a hillside zoning thing, in which case it has very large lot sizes, and you use it kind of as a holding zone when land is annexed into Boise and they haven't come up with a particular development plan or something else they want to be zoned for. That took us a long time to wrap our heads around, and we are recommending that that be split into two. Now, didn't you say you were going to consolidate? Yes. But in this case, you're using it for two different purposes. One is for sensitive lands, meaning hillsides, basically, when you want few houses on large acreages, because that's what your hillside ordinances say is appropriate. The second is you use it for kind of large lot zoning when developers don't know where they want to go after that. We're recommending that those two be split. We are also recommending, in this case, R1A and R1B. You have R1A, R1B, and C. We are recommending that those be converted into R1B, that the R1A with a larger minimum lot size would not continue, that the new minimum lot size in that area would be the R1B. There's far more R1B than there is R1A in Boise. And the question is, does the city of Boise site need a large lot zoning for areas other than sensitive lands? Many cities, when we consider this, kind of say, no, really, we want to go forward saying that kind of 5,000 square foot lot is a standard lot. That's what we want to go forward. So that's a recommendation. R1M is now used. It's very little land in the city zoned into R1, and it's kind of a one-off. It includes some unique types of housing that are more dense than R1C, less dense than R2. This is where, at our meeting in January, you said, come up with a district that allows for a wide variety of new types of housing. You said two things. Part of you said, include new types of housing in the existing zone districts. And other people said, but we also maybe want to consider a new zone district that has a very wide variety of housing. That is our now recommended to be called RM, for low density residential mix. And the list of things that could be done in that are smaller lot, cottage housing, more affordable types of things, the things we talked about in missing middle, are in that district. We have, in limited ways, talked about putting that in R1A, B, and C, but the point is, now here's the point we're highlighting this for. You said new district. When we looked at it, we said, well, R1 right now, M, is kind of a one-off. It allows only a few things, but they're intended to be creative. Could we, and we're asking you this question, could we broaden the variety of R1M, call it RM, but make it broader, rather than saying we have R1M, which is a limited variety district, and then create a brand new district which has a wider variety, which would look and smell a lot like RM, just a broader version of it. So this is in response to maybe there's a need for Boise to have a district that is not trying to get new types of housing into R1A, B, and C, but a district that would allow broad mixes of those types of housing uses in there. So that's that. I want to go on quickly in the interest of time. This is a big area. We will not beat the drum anymore. Blueprint Boise clearly says mixed use districts at a variety of intensities. When we look at your current list, and we said this in January, you've got a number of them that yes, their uses differ. Yes, their minimum lot sizes differ. Yes, their intensities differ, but they basically are aimed at small scale, neighborhood scale activity centers. We are recommending those 4 that are highlighted be consolidated into mixed use neighborhood scale. And in this case, we are recommending that 6 medium scale commercial districts currently, and HS stands for health services, but it functions more like just a mixed use district. That is a medium level of intensity. We are recommending that those be consolidated into one of 2 things. If they were at major corners, the places that are designated in Blueprint Boise as activity centers or major potential transportation hubs where you could build the transportation network, MXA, And MXS being street oriented, meaning in between those nodes. This is what you kind of need to do to develop a transportation system. Create nodes of activity, allow the mixed use in between the nodes, but at lesser intensities, and not pretending that it will all be kind of a walkable center. Often it's along your existing arterials and collectors. It needs to be zoned for what it is. It's street oriented mixed use. It's street oriented shops or residential, but it's not a center. It's fronting on a street and it doesn't go back. It may only be one lot deep. It's not a center. And so, but the uses we are proposing that would be exactly the same in A and S, it's the intensities and the need to lay out a center that happens in A but not S. Last thing I want to highlight is in the overlay districts. And you can see the consolidations. We can talk through any part of it. I'll put the slide back up if you'd like. You now have obviously conservation and neighborhood overlays. Those are being carried over, but grouped together as character protection overlays. The yellow highlighting says, right now you have your design standards and downtown design standards. We are proposing that those be rolled into module 2. Basically, those are codified as and updated and reviewed, but said that's how, right now you apply it to almost every multifamily non-residential use in the city. Okay, that doesn't have to be an overlay district. That's just design standards. There are design standards for multifamily. There are design standards for commercial. There's design standards for mixed use. There are design standards that could be for industrial. Those are just design standards. They come into play very, very often in the types of development I've talked about. Make them design standards in module 3 so they don't have to be a separate overlay district. That allows your existing Capitol Boulevard, Fairview, and your historic district to isolate and give extra or specialized design standards and forms to those particular geographic areas. To have overlay districts like you do today, the D and the DD, which are treated as overlay, but in fact cover vast swaths of the city. When everything's an overlay district, it's not an overlay district. Overlay districts are to aim at particular things that you want to achieve in a particular geographic area. And when you're so broad sweeping as these are, just turn them into module 2. So we are not recommending to be deleted. It would be a big change because a lot of people look at these in the design review process. So that is the 3 things I would like to highlight. And I'll be very happy to flip back and put these slides back on. But the question we wanted to lay out was, what do you think? Is this getting towards what Blueprint Boise said in terms of the types of places that you would have? Now, I want to foreshadow. Your design review process is still there. No one's asked us to get rid of it. We will review it. We'll see how much can be made more objective, but you'd still have that. You still got the dimensional and form and height and scale standards that'll come up in module 2. But in terms of a structure, holding Blueprint Boise in your left hand and those tables in your right hand, do you have any feedback for us? Don't do that, do that, I like that, I don't like that. And what did we miss? Andrea?
I think that's a great introduction, Dawn. So if you take a look, we've got 23 existing zones and proposed. Clarion has 15 zones. So if we're looking at all of those strategic priorities, can we provide a safe, healthy city for everyone, a house for everyone, mobility and movement for everyone? Are those things, can those be accomplished via these zones that we have proposed before us? And so Jessica has posed the question, will there be height restrictions in the proposed R zones?
Yes.
So,
I'm sorry, Andrea. Did you want to answer? Did you want me to?
So
okay.
Yes, so that'll follow in the dimensional standards section that you'll be reviewing in module 2. We just want to make sure, are we looking for the right zones to get density in the correct locations that are going to support all of our strategic priorities and our mission to create a city for everyone?
I have a question, if I may. What could you talk a little bit more about the difference between RM and R2? The way you describe RM with words sounds like what I envision R2 in my mind to be. I'm sure there's some numeric differences, but in terms of the concept, if you could split that out a little bit, that'd be interesting.
Okay, that's good. I will give you a general answer, but I'm going to give Gabby a heads up. I cannot have 3 screens here, so I have a hard time looking at you and looking at the PowerPoint and having some of our draft materials at. Gabby, would you pull up the emerging in draft form use table and highlight the differences between those two? Conceptually, the difference is R1 is R2 is a medium density residential, means it does allow multifamily, and it allows it is a, you can do apartments, you can do condos, but they're going to be low rise. R3 is higher or mid rise housing. R2 is really a multifamily zone. RM is intended to deal with a number of the things that we had talked about earlier: cottage housing, co-housing, things that are not in some cases as big as an apartment building, but they are that missing middle. They are the things that often, and let's have a discussion about this. Often in single family neighborhoods, people are existing single family neighborhoods, people are not sure they want to have those in their neighborhood. But going forward in the future, saying, okay, it's a neighborhood that allows single family, detached and attached. It has townhouses and it has co-housing, and it has these variety of kind of creative forms of low rise that you could mix and match in a neighborhood, so that in the future, the current R1M lands would, if this were approved, gain that level of variety. But in the future, other lands that sought rezoning, for example, from R1C or some other area, or raw lands into RM, would also gain that variety. Gabby, can you help me a little bit with this, with the code up? Thanks.
Yep. So another big difference is because we are trying to make the RM the flexible district and really embrace all those new types of housing in that specific district. Looking at the in draft proposed use table, some of those new types of missing middle housing that we talked about, so cottage, development, co-housing, live work, those are allowed by right in the RM, but they are a conditional use within the R2. So we're really trying to focus the emphasis on those flexible housing types in the RM. They're still allowed in the R2, but those would be more conditional uses. And then also looking through it, R2 generally allows a few more non-residential uses than the RM. That is helpful.
Thank you. And if you had, say, can RM accommodate like a fourplex, like a 4-unit apartment building and that kind of thing, or is it strictly single family?
Fourplex would be included in that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Well, that would have been a better example for me to give. Yeah, it includes those kind of duplex, triplex, fourplexes too.
Yeah. So we have Byron up next, followed by Ian.
Thanks, Andrea. Yeah, Dawn and Gabby, I guess the other question that I have as a follow-up for RM is there a strategy behind the terminology low density? R1M often is a density increase, especially when it's rezoned right now. Is there, and especially when we're talking about cottage villages, that really kind of spikes density in its own right.
Well, two answers to that question. Three answers. First answer, we really struggle with what to call this. So we are completely wide open as to what you think would be a thing to call it. Cottage density, the other issue is cottage density. Yeah, usually, and we haven't drafted this, this has not been finalized. Usually when you allow cottage or co-housing development, it's fairly limited in size, like an acre. It's a half a block. It's not 5 acres. It's not that you can do a whole neighborhood of it. So yes, it is half block. I'm giving you an example. No one has approved 1 acre or half acre or 2 acres. But it's almost always limited in size because people view it as a way of using land that for some reason or another has not been used for traditional houses. So your statement is correct, Byron. The density, the number of houses per acre goes up, but usually there's a size limit. So instead of a 3,000 square foot house, it's a 1,000 square foot house. So yes, the number of units went up, but the impact on the neighborhood is not the same as if you had that number of 2,500 or 2,000 or 3,000 or 4,000 square foot houses. Cottage and co-housing are usually limited in size, not only in the amount of land to put in there, but in the size of the units, in order to try to allow the economics to work for infill, to say you can build more. They can't be big. They can't be as big. But so yes, and if you think it's unfair to call that low, we're very open to naming it something else. We really went back and forth several times.
Thank you, Don. Yeah, I'm very excited by the potential of that zone. I wanted to remain excited about it, and the low density terminology didn't do that for me. So I just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Okay.
So Ian, followed by Richard.
Yeah, I think generally what you're proposing, I mean, without, I'm still digesting it, without looking into it too much, makes sense, kind of trying to condense the zones. I guess an added note about that RM, I mean, it almost makes sense to me to just drop the term low density entirely, because I think what Byron was saying is true. It kind of implies single family or something that's, not, I guess, mixed residential, which is the second half of it. So I would just say drop it or come up with a better term. I don't know. Another question that I kind of wanted to follow up on, which Gabby had started kind of answering. So this fourplex cottage court type stuff is conditional in R2. Are we then saying that it is entirely out of the question for R1B and R1C, or is it conditional there as well? Just kind of wanted to understand that.
Well, again, all of this is still in practice. That's the reason we put this March meeting in, so we don't have this stuff finalized. As our thinking has evolved so far, it is not permitted in RB and on RC. I think that's true, isn't it, Gabby?
It depends on which of those missing middle you're talking about. So you mentioned cottage development, that's conditional in the new R1D. So a duplex is allowed. Single family attached is allowed.
I guess without getting into specifics, it would be compatible, compatible developments for an R1B, I guess. Is that a better way to describe it?
Well, we're going to get into compatibility quite in depth later on in the meeting, but the short answer is for each one of these things, where this is hard stuff to think through what might be acceptable to fit into. That's a new thing that we haven't seen before in a neighborhood that has a character and a scale and a height and a feel. So we are aiming at saying, if these things are allowed, they would be subject to height or scale. I've written things that say in a like an R1B, you can do a duplex, or you could even do attached in some cases, but no more than 4 units. You can't do 10. 10 would break the mold. We've done things that say fourplexes are allowed, but not in a house that is more than 25% bigger than the average of the houses on the block. So I think the answer is yes. We will collectively, all of us, try to wrestle the compatibility challenge to the ground. But to the degree uses are allowed in these neighborhoods, you can assume that we will do our best to try to say ... if it is of a size, scale, and nature that would fit in with the fabric around it.
So Richard, followed by Shellen, then Drew, then Daniel. Then we have some comments from Francis and Ben that I'd like to get to as well. And we're at about 9 minutes left, just to give us some time frames.
Okay, so this is Richard. So thank you. So again, I step back and I look at Blueprint Boise, and the first chapter is environmental stewardship. And I just don't see how for my neighborhood, any of this will promote those policies, because most of those ecological services and environmental benefits come from, in our land, in our area, R1A, pastures, still some small farming operations, et cetera. So for instance, those many Blueprint Boise policies, protect night skies, noise mitigation, study your habitat after you annex an area, protect tree canopy, develop an urban forest, aquifer recharge through having irrigation canals unlined, preserve natural vegetation, minimize urban runoff, preserve opportunities for urban agriculture. All of these things are things that are naturally more supported and more likely to remain intact in our R1A lands. So if you just simply change those to something that allows, much higher density by right, how will that entitlement promote these environmental stewardship policies, the first chapter of Blueprint Boise? And if you don't do that, if you don't have some mechanism to ensure that happens, then the city loses its negotiating power, which otherwise would occur upon a rezone from R1A to R1B or whatever. So again, I think, we have to see Blueprint Boise as a whole, not just as one chapter. And the first chapter is environmental stewardship. So thank you.
Andrea, do you want me to respond?
I do, but before we answer that, I think we have a really good question, and it was actually Francis's, but it's going to tie in nicely. And her question was, will agricultural lands be included in Boise's zoning districts, or is all of that agriculture outside of the city's jurisdiction? So I think both of those tie nicely together. So, go ahead and take a stab at that, Don.
All right. So we'll take Richard's question first. No, I think you make a very good point. The environmental values, I guess we've had it. I think this group has had a very good track record of just speaking honestly and respecting each other. Those values can be protected in a lot of ways. Night skies are protected by good lighting standards. There are fairly dense cities that protect night skies through much better lighting standards. The difference between a 5,000 and a 9,000 square foot lot, to be very frank, is not going to save you on night skies. You got to get the standards have to be strict for everybody. Your stormwater runoff and trying to make sure that you're not over and stream openings. Those are, in my mind, those are strategies that are serious and need to be implemented. Usually that requires a lot substantially bigger than 9,000 square feet. 9,000 square feet is kind of in between. But I want to be very clear, Richard. I take your comment to be you disagree with the merger of R1A and R1B, and I want to acknowledge. I think your vote is don't do that. That's not right. My response is I hear you, but the environmental values that are highlighted at the beginning of Blueprint Boise take kind of citywide rethinking of how you're handling with stormwater and how you're handling lighting and how you're handling habitat and how you're handling stream corridors. Most cities do not do that by trying to preserve large lot sizes within an urbanized area. That's the short answer. But I hear that you, I think, feel strongly that the R1A, R1B is a bad idea.
Well, it's the conversion. It's the conversion without and losing the negotiating power, because these values are very rarely brought forward by staff during a development, or a neighborhood may bring them up, but they just simply get pushed aside and lost. So the time to ensure that they are, the city does take them seriously, and the city has the power then to implement them, is when you create more density by right. Otherwise, you lose that power. And, so it's more than just R1A. It's a principle that would apply to any conversion to higher densities by right. But thank you.
I think we need to put this on the table for the whole group. This is an issue you've been very polite and very articulate in raising it, I think at least 3 times, and maybe in some writings beside that. We just need to put it on the table. Most cities, when they rewrite their ordinances, and once again, Boise will determine its own fate here. But most cities don't try to underzone things for the sake of extracting something when the rezoning happens. Most places say, we think the way to look at our plan is to say we want places like this. and do it. So I don't know. I don't want to sound like I'm ignoring what you're saying, but I'm not. If that is the philosophy of Boise, that we're not going to do what Blueprint Boise says. We're going to keep zoning more or less as it is now because we like to negotiate what we can out of each rezoning. I haven't heard that articulated as a city policy. I've heard you say it several times, Richard, but we need to put it on the table. I'm not sure that is the city's policy right now, to try to leave it as it is for leveraging purposes.
And just to add to that a little bit, I think that we need to acknowledge that the city of Boise is certainly a capital city. And so it is intended to be an urban area. And so we need to be examining where our existing boundaries are, where our area of impacts are, and how we want to grow within those areas. Typically, agricultural is located outside of urban areas. We should be looking at small produce stands, beekeeping, those type of urban agricultural means, specifically because they do provide that environmental impact, but also looks at the preservation of cohabitating with bees and those types of things. So that's an important thing. But the other thing that I'd like to bring up that I've heard time and time again, and I'd like to clear up, is that when we rezone a property, we should not be negotiating anything at that point. That's what provides unpredictability, that if our comprehensive plan is clear and if our zoning code is clear and everybody understands what can be built there and they know what's allowed, that's what creates predictability. That's what creates us a viable plan so that we can plan for transit. So to get transit, you have to have 8 dwelling units per the acre. If you look at some of our other plans, like our transportation action plan, looking at those major corridors where we want to be best of class. So looking at State Street, looking at Fairview, then down Milwaukee as one, and then also looking at Vista Avenue. So those are really connecting some key places, our regional activity centers. So looking at State Street as a major corridor, our Boise Town Square, our airport, and our downtown core, because ultimately that's how that all connects. But not only thinking about today, but thinking about the future. So what do we want best of class to be in 20, 50, or even 100 years? So thinking long range, thinking big picture. So my goal is to make a very, very solid, concrete plan for us to move forward where we're not negotiating. We know what we expect and we are striving to get there. And that's our alarm for this question. But we still have some hands up that I'd like to get to before we move on, because we've got Shellen, Drew, Daniel, and then we also have some of those questions in the chat. So if we could just answer those quickly, that'd be great. Shellen, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, I wasn't sure if you wanted me to ask or if you wanted to go answer the questions in the chat first.
No, go ahead.
Oh, so I think I haven't been able to keep up with the chat, but I appreciate Richard's concern because it's a hard one to manage in a zoning code rewrite. But I guess what I'm struggling with, and maybe it's because I'm a visual person and seeing a map is where I default, but it's hard for me to understand the benefit of having all the different residential units plus R2, R3, and MXN. And I just want to make sure that R2 and R3 wouldn't prohibit a mix of uses. And I would also want to make sure that like the RM, I agree with the previous points, not calling it low density just because that word is not a good one. But why would some of those, like what we're calling missing middle, not be available to say an R1C or perhaps in a scenario, even an R1B? And I guess I just want to understand why we would differentiate those, and maybe I'll see it better on a map.
Well, Shellen, the short answer is in some cases, some of those are available in R1, B, and C as they're but as conditional uses and.
Well, I don't consider that available. Just because, just go, I mean, for the sake of the conversation, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Don. I just, for the sake of the conversation and going back to Andrea's point of like, the point is having certainty.
Okay.
And so being available with a conditional use is one thing, but what about just being available by right is where
Okay. Would you like us, are you voting to do that? Sounds like the short, I'll be very honest, guys. The real thing we're trying to do here is find a balance between what often arises as a very strongly articulated desire not to have non-residential uses in residential neighborhoods and the desire to promote mixed use, which is written all over Blueprint Boise in various ways. And so the short, I hear what you're saying. I think, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think what you would argue for is by right use of some of those things in those residential neighborhoods. So I hear that. When we back up to R2 and R3, some of those non-residential uses will be allowed in those areas. It makes sense to have supporting non-residential uses in apartment and multifamily districts. Usually, we still call them residential districts because they're usually limited to ground floors of multifamily buildings. So can I do a small coffee shop on the ground floor of a multifamily building? Yes, we're considering it accessory and supportive to that building. Yes, you can. Oh, then it's a mixed use district. No, we try to reflect the character of this and say it's treated as if it's supporting the primary residential use of this district. Could I walk in and erect a Starbucks freestanding in the middle of a residential district? Most cities say no, that would be MXN. If you want to do a freestanding commercial use, that is fine. That's an MXN. That is a neighborhood scale mixed use district. If you're doing non-residential uses in a residential district, they're limited in size and location to where they're not the point. The point is to serve the residents in that building or in that area. So the good part of the answer is, I think they will be allowed. The bad part of that answer is usually not as freestanding. I'm just going to erect a freestanding Starbucks in an R2, R3. So.
And I think what I can do to help with that is I can give you some breakdowns of how the current city breaks down. So what our existing zones have as far as percentages go, and give you a link too, so that you can kind of visually see where those areas are on the map. So then everybody can kind of do some exploration as they would like to.
You don't take the other two questions and then move on, Andrea?
Yeah. So let's see. I know I have Daniel's hand up.
Shall I go?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I want to respond to Richard and kind of this idea of negotiation. And one thought I've had is that I kind of view this process as the negotiation, and so that I think we would all, I think regardless of, I think Richard has, big, heavy values around certain environmental attributes that are, and preserving certain kinds of land. And so I think there is a way, and others say, hey, we use these up zones as ways to get, concessions from developers. And so I think one way to think about, if we could have that negotiation here and kind of think about those trade-offs and then have more certainty, then that will just benefit everybody. We'll know which parts of our, how certain districts are going to remain and the ones that are going to change, and it'll just be a much less costly, time-consuming process to bring new development. So that may be a frame that helps people who are kind of trying to work through this. How do we use negotiation now to try to extract things that we think are to the benefit of the city? The other point I just want to observe is that obviously the details, I'm generally fine with this new grouping. The details matter a lot. So, currently in our single family zones, you can have duplexes by right. So we now can do ADUs by right at some scale. So, I might like to see them at a different, at a larger or with different parking requirements. So there's a lot of, the point I just want to make is the details of what's allowed in each of these new zones matters a lot. And I presume that's something we will engage, in the next step.
That's right. Well, we'll engage in part of it next month because we're going to walk you through this and things like what are the conditions on ADUs? What are the conditions on duplexes? What are the conditions on ground floor retail uses in a residential district? Things like that. So yes, it won't be too far down the road. It'll be public next month, and we'll walk you through it. So.
And so Drew had his hand up, but he took it down, I think, and put some things in the comments. Drew, do you want to articulate that better?
Just real quick, I mean, I think one of our goals setting out here was to create the certainty and confidence in what to expect from certain zones. And I guess it maybe just be a gut reaction, but in the residential space, I see the potential for a myriad of conditional use and rezoning applications continuing to come in, which kind of keeps us close to where we're at today. My hope, though, is if we can see use tables, see maps, like Shellen said, that maybe there's additional opportunity to blend some of these if we can make a recommendation that we're comfortable with what these set out to accomplish. And then the only other thing I added was that I did, kind of agree with this notion of taking R3 and looking at it more as a mixed use zone. But then Don, after I wrote that, you explained that you typically keep those residential because you try to encourage the right blending of commercial. So that makes sense. But thanks for the opportunity to elaborate. Those are the key points.
And then going back to some of our comments, so Ben said, would single family homes be allowed in the RM, the R2, and the R3 districts?
Well, again, no, we're still drafting this, but in general, what a number of cities do when they rewrite their codes is to say, probably, maybe, yes, in R2, probably not in R3, but you write it so that all existing single family homes in those zones are deemed not just non-conform, they're conforming uses. If it was erected before the effective date of the code, it is a conforming use of land, so that those property owners can go to the bank and they're in compliance and they can get a loan to do it. But in the future, you're not going to be able to build single family homes in a district that is really intended for more density than that. And there are a number of things along this line that we can talk about next time in terms of, if the real concern is the people who have a particular property use today and you want to protect them, there are lots of things we can do to protect them. We want to keep an equal benefit on, okay, is that a rule we need to carry forward so that tomorrow somebody walking into that zone would be able to do the same thing? Is it really that we want that use in that zone going forward?
No.
Or are we just trying to protect those already with that use today?
I'm like listening to a Zoom.
And just to add a little bit to that, I think that once we get into module 2, we're going to start to talk about densities, what's appropriate. So is there a minimum or a maximum? And, once we also release draft module 1 next time, you're going to have an opportunity to go through that. So if we're going to go ahead and send you some maps and some visuals that you can take a look at, see how our city is composed today, and then how that might change. That's going to give you some good ideas. So what we talk about today will probably not be, the end all be all. They'll probably just pose some questions to see how things would change in the future. And I think we have talked really about a lot of the items that have popped up in our chat, other than really looking at the PUD allows for negotiation, and that has created some unpredictability. We utilize that a lot. We've talked about that as a committee, that we'd like to eliminate that use and really create a zoning code that allows for the right type of zones, the right type of housing products that actually create the house for everybody, allows for us to have an efficient, safe transit system, those types of things. So all of those things have all popped up in our chat. And I think that's good. But in the essence of time, I think we should go and move along to question number 2. And it might actually feed back into some of this as well.
So I'm happy to do that. I'm going to go to that slide next, but I do want to encourage everybody. We wanted you to see this. We wanted to talk about it so that before it lands on your lap next month. But please do think about it. And if there are things you didn't have a chance to say today, or upon first blush, you thought, oh, that sounds fine. And then you go home and say, wow, I'm not sure that's fine at all, or vice versa. I don't like that. And oh, wait, I think I see the reason why they might want to do that. Please write to Andrea. This is the beginning. It's a foreshadowing that you and the public that's watching or participating can see. It's so far from being cast in stone. It's not. But the nature of zoning is we have to write it. We have to put it in front of you, and you have to tell us over time what we did wrong. You can't just talk, as you can see from the detail in this table, and there's a lot more detail behind it. You can't talk about this stuff conceptually. You have to look at a proposal and say, yep, or nope, or well, you're half right. Okay, with that in mind, let's go on to the next question here. I think I can still advance my slides, hopefully. Yeah, I can. Okay, so let's talk about form. There have been lots of comments. Blueprint Boise talks about mixed use a lot, and it talks about design a lot. It talks about fitting in with the character of Boise a lot. And there is no winner in this thing about, well, is it more about use or is it more about form? It's a false dichotomy. Everybody controls uses and forms. Every single code in America controls uses and forms because they both matter. When people say a form-based code versus a use-based code, they're really talking about what they emphasize, or if they're really honest, they admit this is a blend. This is, even if you say a form-based code, you will find Denver has a form-based code, famously form-based code. It has extensive use controls, very more extensive than when they wrote the form-based code. So my point is, both of these are important. We talked a little bit about use, but I want to talk a little bit more about form because I think we've talked generally about it. I'm going to show you a series of pictures. And the point of this is to say, we'd like to hear your thoughts on what is important to control when you say form. Is it, I just want it to be pretty? Is it compatibility, height, scale? What is it? Yeah, unpeel the onion. Peel the onion and say, what is it about this? Kind of, I'll know it when I see it, doesn't count. What is it? And so I'm going to show you, this is something that somebody else developed in the form-based code firm Duane Platter Zyberk in Florida to illustrate. He actually calls it a formostat. And I said, that's great. Can I use it? And he said, have at it. Go ahead and use it. When we talk form, we could be talking building, mass, and placement, meaning where does the bulk of the building go? How close to the street? How close to the side street? How close to other buildings? It could be site design standards like, where does the parking go? Does the parking go behind the building? Does it go beside it? Can it go beside it? Must it go beside it? In a commercial arterial where there's only one lot deep before you get to residential, could they put parking in front of it? Some people say, some form-based codes actually say, well, when you get out to the edges of our city and the suburban, it's okay. It's not walkable. It's a 6-lane arterial. It's not walkable. It's parking in front. It's fine. That's what people expect. Entries. Almost, you could say we want placing, massing, parking behind the building. We want doors on the street. We want people to walk in and out. If you want to have a door off the parking lot, fine, but you're going to have a door to access this from the sidewalk or street. Why? Because it encourages walking. It encourages street activity. It encloses the street. The street doesn't become just a car canal. It becomes a place for people. Building frontage types. Does it matter whether it's a storefront? Does it matter whether it has an arcade and a covering for weather? What are the features, or how does it have to create pedestrian and architectural interest on the street? A roof form. Some places want to control roof forms where there's a dominant. Is flat roofs okay? Is everything else in the whole area? Or do you have to match the flavor of the area? If the predominant shape in this part of the city is shed roofs or hipped or sloped roofs, is that what you want to control? Is that part of the character? Solid and void is architectural speak for windows. Do you care how much of the ground floor is windows so people can theoretically see in or out? And even if it's not very interesting, I got to tell you, almost every newer code we've written in the last 20 years has an anti-blank wall provision. Like, we don't We know that some things that go on in offices are interesting. We know other things are not interesting. We know that sometimes people put display cases and you can't actually see anybody doing anything. But we do know this. We know that extensive blank walls are not going to help with pedestrian walkability, so you can't do that. So do you care about ground floor windows and how much of them? Do you care about second floor windows? Many cities that care about ground floor windows say, you know, we don't actually care about second floor windows. I mean, it's do what you got to do. Facade articulation, horizontal and vertical articulate. This has to do with the blank walls. But I want to point out the question of, do you want to encourage or require doors is separate from, do you want to encourage or require windows is separate from, do you want to encourage or require the horizontal articulation, meaning do there have to be something every so many feet that either divides this up into pedestrian scale, vertically or horizontally, a pilaster, a column that comes out 6 inches, an indent that goes in 4 inches, whatever, but that helps to create light and shadow and interest, architectural interest in the building. Building materials. There are some that say it matters a lot to us. We want stone, we want stucco, we want brick, we don't want X, Y, and Z. Do you have non-style, just special things about that district? Is that district have historic lights and lamps? You know, the historic style lamp in that area of the city. You have things to do that. And then architectural details, you could go into more, you know, they all have some sort of a pediment above the main entrance. They all have an inset granite setting that says this building was built in such and such a year. And we like that. You got to fit into this character of this area. The point of this, guys, is simply, it's like a rheostat. It's like a switch. What elements of form and why is that important? I will tell you, and I want to hear from people, but in many cities, they look at this and they say, you know what, not that, not that, not that. We might want to ban some materials, but we don't want to tell people what materials they do. Yes, we care about facade articulation. Yes, we care about windows. Yes, we care about doors. No, we don't care that much about roof form. I didn't draft this, so I'm putting them in the order that the author did it. But many of them stop about half or 2/3 of the way through and say, some of this is fundamental. Parking behind buildings or beside buildings in most places, doors, windows, buildings near the street, horizontal articulation, facade articulation. Once again, Boise will come out. This discussion will come out in Boise the way you want it to come out. But the question that comes out, and then so again, I'll just summarize a little bit. Usually when you deal with form, obviously it focuses mostly on multifamily, mixed use and non-residential buildings. Don't have a lot of codes that say you got to build your single family house like this. Some cities do. Many cities don't. Most cities say we're not going to get in. We don't have the staff to get into that. Size, height, and scale, of course, and step downs to the lower density neighborhoods area. That's kind of a given, guys. Unless you tell us not to do it, most places say, okay, that height is fine in that location as long as it doesn't overshadow the houses behind it. So it's got to step down. Buildings near the street, doors and windows, facade. I got ahead of myself. That's the usual suspects. Sometimes we don't like X, Y, and Z materials. They don't belong. And sometimes it's in the downtown area. They don't belong. The rest of the city, we're not going to worry about it. Or in our activity centers in downtown, we care. And in multifamily, we don't, do the best you can because we're looking to not drive up the cost of housing. Zoning almost never addresses architectural style or color or this kind of site-specific features. Those last couple panels where it's kind of like, well, but in this area, if you have a particular artistic foible or character or feature in that area, that's usually handled in a different way rather than just form standards. So again, and here I just want to point out, you guys have a robust design review system. We have not been asked to get rid of it. We have been asked to look at it and make it work well in this new code. As a general rule, do not set a rule for something and then have the design review people review it again. Now you're setting a rule and then creating a beauty contest on top of a rule, either one or the other. If it's objective, make it objective. If it is a matter of style and preference, and many cities would put materials in that area and you want to have design do that. But if you're really going to have your design review committee review it and do a kind of a hearing and a more or less subjective view based on standards as to what they think could be better or fits, it's probably best not to double dip and have a rule and then a beauty contest on top of a rule. So with that lengthy introduction, all of that was background to say, when people say, Don, you're talking use, when are you going to talk about form? Answer is, you will see substantial components of form for the activity centers, when we put the districts out next month. And more of it will come in module 2, because module 2 is how do I do it? Not what can I do, how do I do it? And form usually falls into that category. So, but it's just important to think about when people say that word form, what do you mean? Which of the things we've talked about, or things that I never mentioned that are important to you, do you mean when people say form is very important, design is very important to Boise? What are we talking about? Andrea?
I think we can go ahead and open it up to discussions, but even just to kind of set it up for us, we heard a lot from you that yes, we want the missing middle. Yes, there are alternative housing types or even developments that are not allowed today by our zoning code. But then it was also followed by, it has to be done well. And it has to fit in, it has to integrate, it has to be part of that neighborhood. So now we need to talk about some of those elements and what is important for it to fit in, to get those uses or those housing products that we talked about early on, or even those mixed use buildings. How do we integrate them well? What's going to be important? How can we achieve that? And as Don said, that, yeah, the city of Boise has some great design review standards and downtown design review standards and guidelines that are, they apply in a lot of areas, but there are a number of areas throughout the city that those don't apply to. So we need to make sure that if we're looking at good quality design, we need to codify that to make sure that good design happens everywhere, maybe not just on a few corridors. So Byron?
I assumed all the architects' hands would go up immediately after Don opened the questioning up. It looks like they're starting to pile in now. I think after having gone through this process countless times, I'm always going to advocate for, stopping Don's presentation around the first through third slide, in the top left. It's really the architect and the owner's burden of proof to demonstrate how their design meets the criteria, certainly zoning criteria, walkability standards, parking standards, etc. And prescribing too much in the zoning ordinance and even in the design review requirements boxes designers into a corner where that's precisely what you get throughout a city is prescribed off-the-shelf designs. And that may suit some degree of economics when we're looking at building affordability into certain multifamily housing projects. That's certainly a strategy that some designers and developers take. However, it's always up to us to demonstrate how a project fits into neighborhood character. And whenever neighborhood character is weaponized, that terminology is weaponized all the time to try to reject certain projects based on everybody collectively forgetting that design is subjective and art is subjective and beauty is subjective. Once we get past all of those hangups there, really what it comes down to is, how is this project contributing positively to its area? How does it contribute positively to walkability? And sometimes that means the parking is going to be in the rear, and sometimes that means the parking is going to peek out the side, so I don't have a problem with prescriptive elements. Certainly those appear in the building code too, as a way of allowing certain developers, certain designers to find safe haven under some fairly safe design standards. But when it comes at the cost of innovation and certainly allowing designers to do what they're supposed to be doing, which is demonstrating the value of their project, that's when it really kind of works against what we really want as a city. So that's it.
Andrea, I can't see who's raised their hands.
We have Ian and then Hillary.
Thank you. I had a lot more to say, and then Byron talked and said it all. So I think I agree. I might go one further and say slides 1 through 4. I think how the building addresses the street is pretty important. Some areas less than others. We're going to have, as much as people hate them, we're going to have strip malls, we're going to have shopping centers, things like that need to exist for a city to function. And I agree wholeheartedly. I don't think we want to hinder creativity by saying we're not allowing this material, or you must have X amount of glazing, especially when it doesn't relate to what the building's being used for. I think there are, and to Andrea's point, I agree that we need to think of this holistically in the city, not just kind of specific corridors and specific neighborhoods. But I do think there are areas that are more sensitive than others. The shopping areas are, where there's existing, strip malls and shopping areas. I mean, it's part of the city. It's part of the function. So, I mean, we can try and design that the best we can, but ultimately it's got to drive that. So thank you.
So Hillary.
Well, I'm hoping my audio settings are right. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're great.
Great. I'm pulling out one point that Ian said, and dovetailing off of what Byron said. One of the problems in getting far too detailed, and I would say this was probably a little bit of a challenge when I was on design review too, with the design review guidelines, is that you end up unintentionally precluding some uses that you didn't mean to, that would otherwise be, permitted in the zone. But because the design standards are so strict, the use doesn't actually function. Or there is just a better way to do it for the use. Like these are very minor examples that came up, but I do remember, there was one application where, the building was supposed to be pushed up to the street, but it was a car wash, and it really made sense for the cars to queue a different direction. There was another one where, the use was a pawn shop, and the pawn shop operator vehemently did not want people exiting out the back onto an alleyway. It isn't safe for any of the, it's not safe for anybody in that business. So again, it would have been parking up at the street. So there's, and those are kind of not great examples for what's showing on the screen right now. But my point is just that if you get too detailed about how something has to look, you're going to end up unintentionally eliminating some of the uses that you might want to permit.
So that's very clear, and I understand. I get the comment. We've had 3 in a row kind of saying, because again, if I was to telegraph, I'd say a number of cities go there. They go 6 or 7. You're kind of saying 3 or 4, which is fine. You guys have it's your decision. You have a design review process that you're very, very used to, but I guess I'd like to push the discussion a little bit further if I can. Do we have any more hands? Oh, we have 2. So I'm going to shut up. If we have time at the end, I'll raise my questions. Let's hear from the group.
have Kelly followed by Drew.
Oh, can you hear me? I found my mute button. Yay. Okay. Yeah. So, I'm in agreement with everyone else. I don't want to see the elimination of creativity and some new inventive designs in neighborhoods. The one concern I have is to address, like existing neighborhoods, to have design, language to encourage or I guess maybe enforce compatibility with the neighborhood, like in the sense that, I live in a neighborhood where we enter our homes through the alley. And so there have been some proposed new development homes, individual homes and duplexes, where they wanted to do cutouts and have driveways in the front. And so, you know, one of the nice things about our neighborhood is you can walk for many, many blocks down sidewalks without this concern of cars exiting out of the front of their homes. So, you know, if there's some, you know, if we can include language in the code that said, you know, if it's like an infill development, then it needs to meet, you know, be compatible or meet some of the basic guidelines of neighborhoods or setbacks. You know, if there's some, if the homes are 15 feet from the street, maybe, you know, not encourage or allow homes that would be right on the sidewalk, that sort of thing. But otherwise, yeah, I would hate to see things be so restrictive that you're in a community where everything is beige stucco with a certain roof and, you know, whatever.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Just by way of quick response, it is pretty common for newer codes to include in existing areas where there is a fabric. And ironically, sometimes the fabric is, as you gave as an example, 15 feet from the street, regardless of whether the zoning says it was supposed to be 20. Somebody put zoning on it afterwards and the zoning says 20, but all the houses are at 15. It's pretty common to have contextual setback standards, contextual alley access standards, to say various things, saying, you know, in defined areas of the city, not sweeping over all neighborhoods, but in areas where we do have defined fabric, that your setbacks, and they're usually front setbacks, but sometimes they're side setbacks. And frankly, sometimes it's lot coverage and sometimes it's alley access, are, you know, you need to fit in with that pattern. Yeah, you can't do something you can go for a variance and show a hardship, but basically the rules are aligned to say we want to reinforce the established pattern of the blocks on which these types of structures are located. So that's not uncommon. I'll take your comment as a vote in favor of that kind of contextual dimensional standard. And then Drew.
Yeah, just real quick, Don, I think I agree. I may deviate a little bit from prior comments. I think I'm comfortable going a little bit further here in certain areas. Maybe that's downtown or the mixed use activity centers where we have either existing fabric or a clear vision of what we want to see in those spaces. Outside of those areas, I tend to agree though with maybe dialing things back a little bit so that we're not precluding things. But yeah, I agree. I think there are areas where we could confidently maybe push it a little further.
Can I ask a question? Andrea, I'm sorry. Do we have more hands raised?
Not at this time.
It would help me to clarify what I'm hearing. I hear, you know, it's maybe some people it would go up to 6, but most people are down. I would clarify, in the cities that do this, they usually do limit it to downtown and activity centers. They don't do it everywhere. Sometimes they apply basic and you know, blank wall standards to some other districts. So, but you're going to see that as we go down the road. We don't have to decide that today. One of the things that I think I heard when we first kicked this off in late 2019, and then as we refined it through the meetings in the fall of 2020, I'm a little surprised at the comments that I've heard so far, just because what I think I heard, and please tell me I'm wrong, was that there was some frustration over the design review process, that there was frustration over the time it took and the outcomes being unpredictable. And so I'm a little surprised. I'm listening carefully, and you are the committee. I am not the committee, but I'm a little surprised because what I'm kind of hearing is, you know, we kind of like being able to discuss with the committee what we think fits into the neighborhood, even though it takes another round of public review, or it could take more than that. And I thought I heard something different earlier in the process, saying if there's some way we could add predictability and reduce the time of getting development approvals, that would be a good thing. So what am I missing here? What have I not understood?
Don, Roberta has asked that we put up all of the
Sure. Sorry.
Form-based control, so she can look at that.
Yep. I see a couple of hands raised, but I can't tell who they are.
So I have Hillary and then Byron.
Hi, Hillary again. Dawn, just wanted to clarify something. The design review guidelines, I don't think there's, how do I put this? It was a really good process. Like the way that those were put together, it was a thoughtful process, much like this. And I think the problem with the design guidelines is that they fit imperfectly with the existing zoning structure and everything else. And so they ended up adding another layer of inconsistency. It's not so much that the process is flawed, it's just that, we had this patchwork quilt of things that applied and you couldn't tell what applied from one stage to the next.
So just to flesh that out a little further, in your mind, and once again, please correct me, if the design standards and guidelines that are used by the design review committee were clarified and updated and better aligned to Blueprint Boise and the current zone and the new zoning districts, you think that would solve the what I perceive to be frustration with the process and that alone would be enough. It doesn't need to be in the code. I feel real nervousness out there. The people who've spoken so far, don't put it in the code. We're kind of used to having it out. Don't put too much detail in the code, put most of the detail outside the code, but get it right.
Yeah, I think if the design review guidelines actually matched the code, there wouldn't be as much inconsistency. And I know, at least from my perspective, and Jessica can speak up on her perspective too, but there were definitely times where we felt like the matters that were coming in front of us, like the decisions that we would make based on the design review guidelines, were not necessarily reflective of what the zoning code said or what Blueprint Boise said. So I think if they were consistent, it would be less of an issue. I also think we need to be more careful about what districts have a design review overlay. And if, the fewer forms you have on this screen, the more need there is for design review. Yeah,
That's right.
and then vice versa.
That's right. Yep.
Okay, we have Byron, then Ian, followed by Jessica.
Thank you, Andrea. Yeah, building off of what Hillary was saying, I think that is very true. I think the design review standards were just so far ahead. They were much newer than our zoning ordinance. And there were elements of the design review code that circled back and then became recodified, I think, as just parts and pieces into the code, specifically thinking about the substandard lot ordinance and how that was pieced together a little bit later too. I think the amount of predictability can be brought about with a very clear zoning code. And then what ended up happening in design review hearings really was kind of the desperate negotiations of both parties trying to get a little bit more because of those inconsistencies and the incompleteness in either document, because they didn't really agree with each other. So the act of getting our zoning ordinance up to speed with the design review standards, I think will be hugely helpful, as long as they speak the same language and have the same goals. And again, predictability is really just about kind of the data on these projects. Are we predictable in the density and the setbacks? Is it, is the neighborhood and the area that's affected and impacted getting something in the public hearing that's predictable and it's not completely out of left field with the intention that it's going to be negotiated back into compliance? That predictability, when they go into the hearing and they know that those design review elements aren't debatable, they're not horse traded later on for increases or decreases in density and setbacks and height and that sort of thing. If both documents are really working together, then I think we can have that level of predictability.
And that's Thank you for that. That helps advance the discussion, I think. I just want to be clear. In my mind, it is very important that this process, this committee and the public, as they review things, we thrash out this difference. What do you have to do in order to get an approval in Boise that you can't negotiate your way out of? And what does the city want you to do? I think this should versus shall question is fundamental to predictability. Is that negotiable? Is that not negotiable? In most places, I'm going to make a general statement. Maximum building height is not negotiable. It's this tall, and if you do some good things for us, maybe it can be that tall, but it ain't going to be taller than that unless you can prove a variance or something like that. And if you want a taller building than that, you go get rezoned into a district that allows buildings that tall. I'm making a general statement as an example of where it would be very helpful to us, especially as we go down. It's not really today, but a lot of problems go away in terms of predictability and trust if the new code and the new design guidelines and regulations are very clear about the difference between shalls and shoulds. If everything's a should and all the shoulds can be traded against each other to try to get to a deal and a handshake, that's an unpredictable system. And the public is justified in saying, we have no idea what they're going to do. So this question of, is it a shall? Is it a shall in that district? Is it a shall for that type of building? Is it a shall only if the building's over 5 stories? And I'm not arguing for shalls. I'm arguing for very clear thinking about what can be negotiated and what cannot be negotiated within a certain district, a certain zone district. So.
Okay, we have Jessica, and then we're just a little bit over time. So if we'll hear from Jessica, and then I did want to point out, Marissa has noted that if we are trying to be more walkable and bikeable, then we have to always think to design toward the walkability and the bikeability and those people using those. So.
Thanks, Andrea. This is Jessica. One thing I think we need to talk about, not necessarily today or be mindful of, is there's standards and there's guidelines and there's recommendations. One of the frustrations I have on the design review committee, I'm a member of that, is we're just a recommendation to city council or P&Z. So whatever we approve or not approve, that can still get overturned by another committee above our level. The other thing that's a little frustrating at times is the difference between the standard and the guideline. And if you guys want to go back in time and super board, take a look at the Blue Valley Mobile Home Park. That was not a fun proposal to review and look at, because I definitely felt for the mobile home park, but I think at the time the plan met the standard. But if you look at Blueprint Boise, it didn't necessarily meet the guideline of Blueprint Boise, and that was really frustrated. And fortunately, it got all worked out. But that was one of the big projects, at least on the DR level, that it was conflicting for me. I'll leave it at that.
Andrea, are we ready to move on?
I think so.
All right, let's go into oh wait, we had a 5-minute break, don't we?
Oh, we do. Yep. Does everybody want to go ahead and take their 5-minute break so they can stretch and grab a beverage, or?
We could just keep moving on.
Okay, so I'm hearing that, and I heard Drew say that he's comfortable skipping the break. If we're comfortable, then we can certainly move along. Is anybody opposed? Okay, it looks like everybody's commenting that they're okay.
All right, let's go then. We have a third one, which is an important topic, and this is unlike a lot of what we've talked about in past meetings. This is Andrea is going to help out on this, and staff are going to help out on this, because we want to talk about some examples that have happened in Boise recently. So just as Don blathered on about form, what do you mean by form? But we advanced the ball. That last discussion gave me a much better sense of where people are in terms of thinking what they want to regulate as opposed to discuss in your design review process in terms of building form. So this is a similar parallel question. What does compatibility mean? I may have told this group before, and if not, I will tell you now. I hate this word. Compatibility means we are going to argue. We are about to get into an argument because when you don't like something, you find it incompatible. When you like it, you find it compatible. I will foreshadow this by saying some newer zoning ordinances say they define compatibility. Compatibility means the following, and it considers the following elements of the development. So you name them. You name the 6 things you're going to look at for compatibility. But again, remember I'm going to back up a little bit. There is an issue with frustration with the current code, and I've learned a lot about where that comes from today. So I heard what we had in the last 10, 15 minutes. Frustration and then also I think some angst over particular development decisions that have been made by the city over the past couple of years, which travel under the umbrella, that's not compatible. It shouldn't have been approved. It's not compatible. So once again, we need to kind of advance the thinking of this group and be clear as we go down the road. When the code says, if it says compatible, what does that mean besides I know it when I like it? So do you want to talk through these examples, Andrea? I'll advance the slides for you.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's a great example to lead us in. But then I'm also reading some of our chat comments, and Roberta had commented, that she appreciates the concern that people talk about when they talk about neighborhood character or compatibility. But when she listens to that, it can be subjective, it's squishy, it's not tangible, it's not predictable. And so in some of our past meetings, we've also talked about, what does that mean? And some people brought up the idea of, hey, have you seen the development out at Maple Grove and Brogan? So it's out by Lake Hazel and Maple Grove. And so I went out and took a look at it. And then I called Ada County and I said, tell me about it, and can you send me the approval? And so just to tell you a little bit about it, it was built in 2007. It was 121 units on 6.4 acres. The development provided 137 parking spaces, and they did that specifically because they were required to provide the 135 regular spaces, 2 ADA spaces, and then they also provided 6 bike spaces. So then I talked to them about it and they said, oh my goodness, yes, that development created some change for us. I said, tell me about it. And they said, well, our parking code said at the time that really they didn't need to have much parking. They had to have 1 parking space for every unit that they provided, and then a minimum amount of guest parking. And so they literally provided the 135 spaces and plus the 2 ADA. And I said, okay, and what happened next? So they said, well, that specific development triggered changes in our code. And they explained to me that those changes occurred and it created a whole new parking structure. And so today, if these guys were to come in to Ada County based on their code change, and I assumed that each one of these units was 2 bedrooms, so today they would have to provide 253 parking spaces. So they have to provide 2 spaces for each unit plus 31 guest spaces for a total of 253 spaces. So it's a pretty significant swing from where Ada County was with their multifamily standards and parking to where they are today. And that was a big swing to me. Then I thought it would be also beneficial to present what would Boise City's existing code say. And I also assumed 2 bedrooms. So if this was built in the city of Boise today, we would require 171 parking stalls. So we're kind of in that middle between that 135 and that 253. What the right answer is, I'm not sure, but we do need to be careful. Just based on my conversations with Ada County, they said that the reaction was, we have to provide a lot of parking now because of the comments we received, and we've probably gone too far. And so let's not do the large pendulum swing, maybe look to where that ball ends in the middle, to make sure that we're accommodating enough and trying to be compatible and not negatively or adversely impact that surrounding area, but getting it right. So I just wanted to follow up, show you the research that I did based on what the county was requiring, what their current standards would be today, and then how that would fit in with what the city's current zoning standard is. Then I also heard from some of you saying, hey, will you give me some sites throughout the city or our area that I can visit, and I can actually stand and I can smell and I can see and I can actually feel. So I thought it would be appropriate to just kind of walk you through a couple of those. So if we can just kind of quickly go through the slides, and I'll just give you some items, but this is actually a supporting photo of the development of what happens. I visited the site at about 5:45 p.m. on a weekday. So this would be everybody returning from home, and this is the on-street parking. So we can go ahead. So the examples that I provided you, I tried to give you a good variance. So you'll notice some are 1, 2, and 3 stories. Some are cottage, some are just 3 plexes, 4 plexes, those types of things. This one's found in Garden City, and it's actually a triplex. So it's 3 attached units, and it provides single car garages. And we can just go to the next one. This is an existing 4-plex. So it looks like a large home. It exists on 8th Street. It was built in 1900. Again, this is going to be about 2.5 stories just because it has the little cupola on top. But you can kind of walk, see how these are. And just as you are going about, look at the height, look at the massing, look where the parking is located. Do they have parking? Those types of things so that you can kind of gauge where they're at. So we can go to the next one. This one was built in 1969. This is a 6-plex. It's near Boise State on the corner of Beacon and Vermont. It's 2 stories, and it fits into the neighborhood really well. Go ahead. Whoa, somebody's angry. We also have a 10-unit multifamily development. It was built in 1947. That's on the corner of 16th and Bannock Street. And it kind of has almost the cottage feel mixed with the courtyard feel. So that's kind of a hybrid there. But you're going to see some areas it's 2 stories and some it's 3. So that exists there. We can go ahead and move to the next. This is a 1-story flat roof structure that has actually 16 units. It is located on the corner of Denver and University by Boise State. It was built in 1946. It's one of my favorites, actually. But you'll see that, that's a lot of units, and actually they don't provide any parking. We can go to the next one. This is a courtyard style development. It has a total of 8 units. It was built in 1941. So it's got that interior common space, and then it's outlined in the rear. This one was interesting. It had alley loaded garages, a single space per unit. And then the remainder was on-street parking. And we can go to the next one. Again, we've got a cottage style development. There's 4. They're detached units with shared common space. It's located on 10th Street. It was built in 1935. And again, no parking for this particular one. Everything is on-street parking. We can go to the next one. This is on Bannock Street. This is 7 units, cottage style development. Again, single story, very ranch style brick, built in 1951. In this particular case, again, all on-street parking, no off-street parking provided. Excuse me. And go ahead and go to the next one. Again, a cottage style development located on 16th Street, 7 units built in 1925. Your traditional gable style, cottage style homes, very cute. In this particular case, they had an alley loaded garage, but it didn't appear to be usable. The remainder is all on-street parking here. And go to the next one. This is a live work unit. This is a relatively new one. It was built in 2017. And the interesting thing with this development is that the ground floor living space, so you'll come off of the public sidewalk as you enter, that is actually the work area for the live work where you can work. And then beyond that or above is actually the live area. All of these units are currently not being used for live work at this time. So that was interesting. Go ahead to go to the next one. We have some other live work units. Again, these are 6 units. They're located on Iowa and Longmont Street, just off of Broadway, built in 2007. Again, the interesting part here, these units are not being utilized for live work. Work is at that ground floor up front. Live is behind and above that unit. And then the next one. And then these ones are out in the garden center. So Hill Road, 36, Catalpa area, 36th Street Garden Center. These were built in 2009. There's actually 3 units. One is currently for lease, but the other 2 are operating as live work units. So they just have some small scale retail up front and services, and then living behind and above. So just to kind of give you a good example of some of the things that we do have out there. This was a good exercise for me, looking at the different sizes of the units. So a lot of the cottage style, those type of things were all very, very small units. So probably studios or single bedroom. And so when we're providing housing, yep, that's going to be one component that we want to think about, but we're also going to want to think about individuals that have families and have those larger units, so 2 or 3 bedrooms. I also wanted to kind of provide you multiple years so you could kind of see the evolution of architecture, of how that's kind of gone about and the different ways that people have chosen to use the properties. The big one that I also noticed is taking a look at on-street parking. So, and that's something that we'll probably want to think about as well as we move forward. If we are building these streets that accommodate for on-street parking, if we're creating these paved surfaces, do we want to use them for parking? That's an effective use of our land, or do we want to use that as visitor parking, those types of things. So just when you go out and visit, really kind of take it all in, look at, the overall height. Does it fit in? What size of units do you think they are? Are they small? Where are entries and doors? Where are driveways located? All of those things are going to contribute to the neighborhood, the context, the compatibility. But these are just some good examples that I'd heard some of you request examples, and I thought that they would be good ones for you.
Okay, so let's just go. Once again, these are examples of, and I think examples for you guys of different types of housing. And the question behind the presentation is, what makes things like this compatible or not compatible? And we just put a list up here just to try to draw people out. Height is often high at the list. I'm not going to read you this. You can look at this list itself, and maybe I'll just leave it up, but I'll put the question up and then I'll put this back up. So the question was this issue of it has to fit in if it's done right. And that's the question is, what does that mean? Which of these things should, and let's leave it open, guys, should either the code or the design standards be dealing with in terms of what makes something fit in or not? I see Byron's raised his hand. Andrea, do you want to honcho this? This speakers?
Sure.
Okay.
Byron, take it away.
Thanks. Yeah, when compatibility is used in the negative, oftentimes people are really just talking about impacts, and I think that's a very fair, conversion. Really, when you're using one word to mean another. Impacts are really where most people are, especially in neighborhoods at the ground level, and not very many people want to stand up in front of a room of people and try to direct a conversation about the positive ways that compatibility can be applied, how a project or a design is compatible with a neighborhood, because there are literally billions of ways, of course, in the design sense that a project can be compatible with the area around it. But when it's used in the negative, it's really, a lot of times talking about impacts. And so I wish we would, as a community and as a city, talk about impacts, because I think that really directs us toward those solutions, and that it allows the designer to really focus design solutions toward minimizing impacts.
Byron, just to push it further, when you, but let's push it a little bit further. What do you think is in many people's minds, or can you generalize? The first example Andrea gave was parking impacts. It related to an overcorrection in Ada County, or at least they worry that it might be an overcorrection. Down at the bottom of this list is parking impacts. Is there a way of do any of the things on this list, are they the types of impacts that people are worried about, or did we miss it altogether? Is it simply change or the amount of people who are going to be living there?
It is change. That's a very good question, Don. It is change a lot of times, and architects are usually, to borrow a phrase, we're often like the doulas there that are trying to help people go through sometimes what seems like a very traumatic change, right? You buy a home in a single family residential neighborhood, and you expect that home to always live in that environment, at least as long as you're alive, right? Until you can get the final value out of your investment. And so doing a lot of ADU projects, I guess, gives a little bit of perspective on that. Most of the time people can understand and they can hold in their heads at the same time two conflicting ideas about ADUs. One of them is, I want the ability to use my property for it to its fullest extent. I want to be able to build an ADU and not have my neighbors tell me I can't build an ADU. But I also at the same time want to be able to tell my neighbors they can't build an ADU if it negatively impacts my backyard or my views or my access to sunlight or my impressions of privacy in my backyard. So it is a double-edged sword, and those impacts really, just by using that terminology and understanding that impacts are real, because people always are going to be change adverse in some ways, helping us move that conversation into what is a realistic expectation for impacts. Realistically, what can you ask for from your neighbors when they're making improvements on their house? Realistically, what can you expect when you are living in a metropolitan area that changed before you and will continue to change during your lifetime and after you? So those impacts are very nebulous, and there isn't really a good answer for that, except that it happens with a lot of dialogue, and it really depends on how big those impacts are.
And I would only say, I would agree, and most of this will come up in module 2. We wanted to do this as part of the uses, because in some cases, even module 1 will put use specific standards. So if you're doing this next to that, you need to do X, and it's about mitigating adverse impact. So it's relevant to today. It's also going to be relevant to module 2, but I would just urge this whole group, let's have as much of that discussion now it helps enormously. And whether you decide, Byron raised three things that were not on this list: privacy, light, and views. And, if those are important, let's list them. If those are not to be taken into incompatibility, then you could say that. In most cities, I'm not predicting how this will come out at all. In many cities, they say, well, everybody expects to keep the views they had. But this city does not protect views. If you have the right to build a two-story building, then you have the right to build a two-story building. And if it blocks views, it blocks views. If you want to go to a three-story building, then we consider views, but you don't consider it as compatible within the realm of what goes on. I'm only using that as an example to sort that out so the public can know this town protects views, even to the degree of preventing somebody from building something it could otherwise build, or this town does not protect views, or it only protects defined views. Let's go ahead. I see we have some hands.
I just wanted to follow up really quick. One more thing. That's kind of like what designers are supposed to be doing. That's our job, is to try to mitigate and minimize those impacts. And it offers architects an opportunity to showcase their design prowess, really, in being that in-between agent between the existing property owners and the property that's being changed. Design plays a huge role in that, because sometimes most people are thinking about the negatively impacted times in their lives. They're looking at bad design. They're looking at the times where design failed them.
Yes, we have Kelly, then Richard, and then Damon. And we have about 10 minutes left, but we do not have any attendees. So we are in good standing to keep moving and using this 10 minutes to our benefit.
So is it my turn now? Okay. Yeah. So first of all, Byron, what you said was, you just hit the nail on the head in the impacts and so forth. So, and also, Andrea, thank you so much for those examples. Two of the examples that she shared are actually in my neighborhood, and they're two universally loved projects. One of them is the newer one that is on Bannock Street. And then I have an example in my neighborhood of one that is a universally hated new infill project. So I'll share a picture of that out. So if you're wandering around my neighborhood, you just passed it. The one that one's in my neighborhood. This one is universally loved. And then there's the other one on 16th Street, the cottage style houses. They're the ones that are 2 and 3 story.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And they're now white. That's an older, this one, they're now white, and they put new fencing on and so forth. The new owners of this property made it very attractive. And we were happy to see them keep it. We were concerned that this would be leveled and something else would be built there, because I think it's either RO or C2. But the example of the property that I'll send to you is an infill project that went in about 5 or 7 years ago. And it fits in with what Brian was describing. It comes a lot. I hear it a lot in P&Z hearings where, they're like, we'll give an example of a bad project. It's this one at Jefferson Street. But what the neighbors don't understand was that was within code. It was allowed to be 3 stories tall. The setbacks, everything was allowed in that project, but it's the code for our neighborhood was written after most of the homes were built. So it's next to a 2-story, very cute cottage style house. And then you have this 3-story and it has a very large kind of modern angled roof, which makes it even taller, right? And so that is what causes the anxiety with my neighbors. And when I talk to people in infill development in other neighborhoods in the areas around the downtown area, of having that kind of project go in. And so, I'm glad you said we did, Byron. I want us to have a lot of dialogue in how we can, incorporate some of that in the code. I know that we can't squash all new development or creativity. Taste does change, but I think that's what causes a lot of anxiety. So that's all I wanted to share.
So
and I'll send that slide out with the other developments. So if you're in my neighborhood, check that one out. And if I'm on 19th and Jefferson, say hi.
So Byron raised three factors that we had not listed. You've raised, well, it may be listed. I've gone to a different slide, but you've raised the roof shape being out of context, and also the height being, height is usually number one on everybody's list. Well, if it's too tall, then don't talk to me about how it's compatible. There are ways of shaping buildings to make them compatible, but my point is it's usually high on people's list. You've raised those two things, height and roof shape. In both of those cases, some newer codes say, look, yeah, we zone to what we want to have here. And 3 stories is what we want to have. So if you have a 2-story house and they build 3, sorry, maybe you want to think about selling and building a 3-story house. Some cities do that. Others do the opposite. Yes, you have 3-story zoning, but if the predominant height of buildings on either side of you or on that block face or on that block is 2 stories, then you're going to be limited to 2 stories. My point is you can do contextual standards. There's a lot of philosophical discussion. Are we zoning for compatibility, which I think there's a lot of discussion around that in Boise right now, or are we zoning for the density we want to be there in the long run? But both options are pretty common in newer codes. There's not a right answer to that.
Thank you, Don. We have Richard, then Damon, followed by Brad.
Yeah, so this is Richard. Big trees are a thing that, people feel a loss of compatibility when they lose those. I'll just throw that out there, wherever you can put that. Regarding the parking issue, I personally have always kind of been in favor of reduced parking. Less asphalt's good. But there's a really interesting story that happened in our neighborhood where, we had another 3-story apartment building put on, greenfield, in our transit-oriented development area, but unfortunately there isn't any transit there. And one of the interesting things that came out, we first heard complaints from a nearby apartment complex owner about the lack of parking on the new apartment complex, and then from a couple of the residents in the general area. It turns out that the project was using swales for their storm runoff, which means a lot of the water goes out into the street, which then means that people have to park when you have water, several feet away from the curb. Well, if there is a curb there. Right now, ACHD, our highway department, considers it a rural area, so they say swales are fine, even though we're building a three-story apartments there. In this particular place, it's right next to State Street, where the traffic is habitually at 60 miles per hour. So if you're turning into this narrow roadway, you really seriously have to look in your rearview mirror and wonder how much do you want to risk putting your brakes on before you turn. You have to thread between a canal into this narrow street that's often filled with water. And then when it rains, it's not only slippery, but people even park farther into the street in the existing apartments because of the swales. So my point is that's, everybody knows that's just crazy. Everybody knows it's a bad design. ACHD said, oh, well, if it's not rural for swales, well, then it's commercial because it's apartments. So swales are okay as well. The minimal parking then, of course, will put all these tires and obstructions on the street, and people will be turning in there really rapidly. It's just bad. And the way the system worked, planning and zoning and city council said, well, design review will deal with it. Obviously, that's a problem. Got to design review, and design review is like, well, that's not our issue. That's ACHD. ACHD never had a public hearing because it was under 100 units. So it's kind of a Joseph Heller kind of situation. And the outcome isn't good, and it frustrates everybody. And everybody knows it's bad. So I'll just leave you with that.
Who's next?
We have Damon, followed by Brad.
Yeah, thanks. I'll do my best to keep it brief. I appreciate what Richard said about large trees versus asphalt. I don't know that I necessarily have the language to articulate engagement with the street, whether that's setbacks or buffering, and context, and whether that goes within planning or is more in the field of Byron and architecture. But I think there's for me, compatibility, there's a big difference between a cute cottage that's set back with trees and green space versus a very harsh street to straight vertical 2-story townhome sandwiched together. And so the more that we can gravitate towards a cozier setting with easier street engagement and less of a harsh kind of horizontal to vertical facade would be something that I would appreciate. Thanks.
Thanks.
So we are going to be followed up by Brad, but I just wanted to add, just because I have heard, Richard brought up a really great point about swales, trees. Damon also, when we look at, there's open space, oftentimes there's trees and those type of amenities that are on a parcel. So I hope that you can see how we have all of these different competing issues. So when we talk about environmental stewardship, that is important. That we're looking at, and it doesn't have to be about density. We can achieve environmental stewardship in different ways. So whether we're preserving existing structures through adaptive reuse, working on infill. So we've talked about having shopping centers with large parking lots that offer us opportunities, maybe retail or office. Because of COVID changes things, and we're going to have opportunities for new residential products. We can start to look at different things that way. We can look at non-permeable pavers and products that we can then replenish our aquifer, those types of things, making sure that we're preserving open space and not fully engulfing a site in asphalt or a building, those types of things. So just keep in mind that we have all of these different competing interests that we'll be trying to weigh. We're going to make sure that that pendulum is, working toward our favor, and we're thinking about the future too, because all of these things are really important to consider because they contribute to our livability, but they also ensure that we can have efficient and safe transit, that we have a choice on how we walk or bike or commute to somewhere. All of these things are critically important. So, and then I just want to open it up to Brad for some of our final comments. And then as you guys have noticed, anytime I get a recommendation for, hey, is there a way we can provide comment afterwards? We can create surveys so that we can get your feedback and make sure that you're heard. Or if you want to share with your group and you want to get back to us later, we can do that. So if you want examples, we can certainly accommodate you and make sure that you have the information you need to make a good recommendation. So if you have recommendations, let us know. We can certainly accommodate you. So they're welcome. So Brad, take it away.
Yeah, I always love being the last one to comment because then I leave a lasting impression on it. Waiting to talk, I kind of lose track of what I want to talk about. But one thing I wanted to say to Andrea, I appreciate the examples that you brought forth of what's going on around town. But what it looked like, so I can think straight, could somebody put at least something on the screen that was
one of the examples?
Yeah, something like that. But a lot of these houses or these developments or these multi-family dwellings you put in are 50 to 100 years old. They're people are used to seeing them in their neighborhoods, and we got to remember that, and not to offend anybody, but these houses were built back when we were driving Model Ts or something, and the wives stayed home and didn't drive. There was a one-car, family, and so those kinds of things, we don't even notice anymore. But if you go trying to add this kind of development into an existing neighborhood or something, we're in a modern world. Everybody has a car. There's 2 cars plus the kids' car, all that, and and besides that, what's the impact on sewer and water, and irrigation? Irrigation's available to some of these people that And, what's the impact on that, and what's going to be taken away from these existing neighborhoods. Another thing is, we're adults here. We're not a bunch of kids that our parents never said no to. So if you buy a house in a neighborhood and you want to subdivide it, maybe you should look into what the zoning is before you purchase, instead of trying to push something through that people are not going to agree with. So anyway, thanks.
Thank you. So Andrea, do we need to wind up with next steps? Or do
I think that would be really helpful. I want to remind everybody that we are changing it up a little bit for April. So instead of the 3rd Thursday, we're going to meet with you on that 4th Thursday. And next week or next month is going to be a big, heavy lift. So be ready, because we're going to release a draft of Module 1 and really get you talking. So you saw kind of a preliminary of how the zones may lay out as we move forward. We might change those based on some of the initial feedback that we've heard today. But then you're going to start to see how other things fit. You're going to see the use table. You're going to see where single family residential dwellings are allowed in those zones, where they're prohibited, where conditional uses are. And so be thinking about those. You're not going to see dimensional standards quite yet. So don't expect to see building heights or setbacks or densities that are attached to that, because that's coming in Module 2. That's just too much for us to handle at one time. So we're going to start heading that way. So get ready for a really big lift. It's going to be big, but it's exciting. We've got lots of opportunity ahead. So we look forward to your feedback.
And I would just urge you, as we put out this public draft and you read it, and we beg you to read it, remember, this is a draft and it is there to be commented on. And then there will be a draft of module there, and it is there to be commented on. And then there's module 3, and then there's a consolidated draft. So we are headed towards the first of several, at least 4 rounds of, did we get this right? Did we not hear you right? And I would urge you to tell your neighbors and friends the same thing. This is a work in progress. They have to put a draft out. They have to hear from you. And the reason we do this is that it gives the public multiple opportunities to say, you still didn't get it right. Or I guess the people who disagree with me actually outvoted me on this one. The point is there will be multiple rounds to kind of say, can we refine this and can we get that in better alignment with where we think we want to go as a city? So the fact that it will be released does not mean it's final. It means we're putting it on the page on the website and the public and you to review it and tell us what's right and what's wrong. So I think we're gonna see you on the 22nd, right, Andrea?
Yes.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for your time. And you have informed and educated me today in ways that I needed to be informed and educated. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.